If you enjoy stories that touch the heart, consider subscribing to our channel and giving this video a like. It helps us bring more narratives like this to you. The smell of stale coffee and sawdust was the scent of Michael's life. It clung to the fibers of his flannel shirts, settled deep into the lines on his hands, and greeted him every morning at 4:30 a.m. when his internal clock, honed by 35 years of service to the Clayton Furniture Factory, jolted him awake. The house on Elm Street was quiet at this hour, holding its breath in the pre-dawn stillness. It was a good house, a sturdy two-story colonial that had belonged to his father and his father's father before him. It had good bones, as Michael liked to say, but the mortgage felt like a cancer, slowly eating away at its foundation. For 20 years, every Thursday, Michael had performed a ritual. After his shift, covered in a fine layer of dust that made him look older than his 58 years, he would stop at the same 7-Eleven on the corner of Maple and First. He would hand $2, often crumpled and soft from a day in his pocket, to the clerk, and recite the 6 numbers that were as much a part of him as his own Social Security number: 4, 14, 22, 28, 36, 42. These weren't random digits. They were a map of his life. 4, for the month he married Sarah. 14, for the day his son Ethan was born. 22, the age he was when he bought his first real car, a '85 Ford pickup. 28, his jersey number from the high school football team. 36, the number of the house he grew up in just 2 blocks away. And 42, the age his own father was when he passed away, leaving him the house and the responsibility that came with it. The ticket was a sacrament. It wasn't about greed, it was about hope. It was the physical manifestation of a belief that one day, the universe would finally acknowledge his tireless labor, his unwavering dedication. It was the dream of paying off the house, of sending Ethan to college without the crushing weight of student loans, of finally giving Sarah the garden she'd always wanted, with a real greenhouse instead of the makeshift plastic tent she used to protect her tomato plants from the early frost. The ticket was a $2 prayer, whispered once a week into the void. Ethan, now 22 himself, understood the ritual better than anyone. He'd grown up with it. As a boy, he'd watch his father carefully place the small slip of paper under a magnet on the refrigerator, a magnet shaped like a smiling cartoon wrench, as if it were a holy relic. They never won more than a few dollars, just enough to buy the next week's ticket and maybe a candy bar for Ethan. Yet, the hope never seemed to tarnish. But hope, Michael was learning, was a luxury item, and lately, luxuries were the first thing to go. The trouble started subtly. The factory, a behemoth of brick and steel that had employed half the town for a century, was struggling. Whispers of restructuring and automation slithered through the assembly lines. First, they cut the overtime. For Michael, who relied on that extra time and a half to stay ahead of the bills, it was a body blow. Then came the announcement that shattered the fragile piece of their lives. The factory was downsizing. Michael's position wasn't eliminated, but his hours were cut by a third. He came home that day looking like a ghost, the sawdust on his clothes a ghostly shroud. He didn't say a word, just sat at the kitchen table staring at the stack of envelopes, the mortgage statement, the electric bill, a final notice from the credit card company, as if they were his death sentence. The house on Elm Street, once a sanctuary, began to feel like a prison. The silence was heavier, punctuated only by Sarah's worried sighs and the forced cheerfulness in Ethan's voice. Ethan worked in tech support for a cable company, a job of headsets and flickering screens that Michael couldn't quite comprehend. He contributed what he could, but his salary was a bucket against a tidal wave of debt. That Thursday arrived with a cold, biting wind that seemed to mock the very idea of a hopeful spring. Michael's shift ended, and he drove his aging pickup truck with the engine that coughed like an old man. He pulled into the 7-Eleven parking lot out of sheer ingrained habit. He sat there for a long time, the engine idling roughly, and stared at the brightly lit store. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. Inside was a $10 bill and a 5. That was it until his meager paycheck cleared tomorrow. He thought of the leaky faucet in the bathroom, the noise of it a constant dripping reminder of things he couldn't afford to fix. He thought of the look on Sarah's face that morning when she opened the refrigerator and saw how little was inside. He thought of the notice from the bank, its legalistic language a cold, sterile threat. Failure to remit payment will result in foreclosure proceedings. The numbers, 4, 14, 22, 28, 36, 42, flashed in his mind. For 2 decades they had been his mantra, his secret language of hope. Now, they felt like a cruel joke, a fool's tax, the price of delusion. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of all 20 years of failed dreams, Michael put the truck in reverse. He didn't turn off the engine. He just backed out of the parking spot and drove away, leaving the 7-Eleven and his ritual shrinking in the rearview mirror. When he walked into the house, he was carrying a gallon of milk and a loaf of bread. He placed them on the counter with a thud that echoed the finality of his decision. Sarah looked up from the stove, her eyes immediately going to the refrigerator. The spot under the wrench magnet was empty. You didn't go?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Michael shook his head, unable to meet her gaze. "It's $2, Sarah. We need it for this." He gestured vaguely at the bread and milk. "There's no point, it's over, no more." Ethan was standing in the doorway to the living room, having heard everything. He saw his father's slumped shoulders, the defeat etched into every line on his face. He had never seen him look so broken. It wasn't just about giving up on the lottery. It was as if the pilot light of his father's spirit had been extinguished. The man who had taught him to never give up, who had worked until his hands bled to provide for them, had finally surrendered. Later that night, the house was submerged in a tense quiet. Michael sat in his worn armchair, the television on but its light flickering across his vacant eyes. He wasn't watching. He was just absent. Ethan looked at his father, and then at the wrench magnet on the fridge. The empty space beneath it felt like a wound in the heart of their home. A profound sense of injustice washed over him. It wasn't fair. After a lifetime of hard work, his father deserved more than this slow, grinding defeat. He deserved to hold on to that one small, irrational piece of hope. Quietly, Ethan stood up. He walked to the small dish by the door where he kept his tips and pocket cash. He pulled out a crumpled $5 bill. His hands didn't shake. They were moved by a sudden, fierce certainty. He slipped on his jacket and walked towards the door. "Where are you going, sweetie?" Sarah asked, her voice tired. "Just need to get some air," Ethan said, his voice steady. He didn't just get air. He drove his own car, a 10-year-old sedan, directly to the 7-Eleven. The fluorescent lights hummed with an artificial energy that felt alien and sacred all at once. He walked to the counter, his heart pounding a strange rhythm of rebellion and reverence. "One Powerball ticket," he said to the clerk. The clerk, a young woman with tired eyes, nodded. "Numbers?" Ethan took a deep breath, and the numbers came out of him as if he were reciting his own name. 4, 14, 22, 28, 36, 42. He paid his $2 and took the ticket. It felt impossibly light in his hand, yet it carried the weight of a 20-year legacy. This wasn't for him. This was for his father. It was an act of defiance against despair, a refusal to let the family's longest-held dream die in the cold silence of the house on Elm Street. He walked out of the store and looked at the slip of paper under the glow of the streetlights. For the first time in 20 years, the sacred numbers belonged to a new generation. Ethan placed the ticket in the back slot of his wallet, behind his driver's license, a place he rarely looked. It felt both dangerous and sacred, a secret sun warming his pocket. When he returned home, the gallon of milk Michael had bought sat on the counter, a stark monument to his father's pragmatism. The heavy silence had returned, thicker this time, layered with the unspoken grief of a dream deferred. Michael was already in his armchair, the television murmuring a low-budget crime drama that neither he nor Sarah was watching. They were simply coexisting in a shared space of anxiety. Ethan said nothing about his trip. To mention it would be to introduce a volatile element into the fragile ecosystem of their despair. It would be an act of cruelty, offering a hope that was, by all statistical measures, false. So he kept his secret, and the night unfolded with the quiet tension of a string pulled taut. The next day was a Friday, and the world went on as if nothing had changed. Michael left for the factory, his shoulders still stooped, his lunch pail feeling lighter than usual. Sarah meticulously scoured the grocery flyers, her pen circling meager deals on canned soup and ground turkey, a general planning a war on poverty with coupons as her only weapon. Ethan went to his own job, a universe of beeping phones and frustrated customers complaining about their internet speeds. He solved their problems with a calm, practiced patience, while his own life felt like an unsolvable equation. It was during his 30-minute lunch break that he remembered. He was sitting in his car in the sprawling parking lot, eating a sandwich he'd made at home. He pulled out his phone intending to scroll mindlessly through social media when the memory of the 7-Eleven surfaced. The lottery drawing. It had happened last night. A strange feeling, a mixture of dread and a ridiculous, flickering hope churned in his stomach. He told himself it was nothing. He was just closing the loop, confirming the inevitable loss so he could throw the ticket away and forget. He opened his browser and typed Powerball winning numbers into the search bar. The official site loaded, the 6 winning numbers displayed in bright, cheerful circles that seemed to mock the gravity of his search. And then he saw it. The first number. A small jolt. A flicker of recognition. That's our number. But it was a common number. A coincidence. He let his eyes drift to the next one. His breath hitched. His heart gave a single hard thump against his ribs. No, it can't be. He felt a strange buzzing in his ears. He forced himself to look at the third number, his eyes tracing the curve of the digits as if they were a foreign language he was trying to decipher. The sandwich in his other hand slipped from his grasp, falling onto the passenger seat. He didn't notice. The world outside his car, the people walking back to the office, the distant traffic, was fading into an indistinct blur. He could only see the screen of his phone. His hands began to shake. A tremor that started in his fingertips and radiated up his arms. This wasn't possible. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies, to other people, to fictional characters in stories designed to give people like his father a reason to keep buying tickets. A sound escaped his lips, a choked gasp. He fumbled for his wallet, his fingers suddenly clumsy and uncooperative. He pulled the ticket out. The ink was cheap, the paper was flimsy, but as he held it, it felt like the heaviest object in the world. He compared the numbers on the screen to the numbers on the ticket, his eyes darting back and forth, expecting a mistake, a misprint, a flaw in his own vision. They were the same. And the final number, the Powerball, 42. Ethan stopped breathing. For a full 10 seconds, the world was utterly silent and still. The buzzing in his ears became a roar. He had to read them one more time. 414, 22, 28, 36, 42. His father's life, encoded in a sequence of digits, was now staring back at him from a lottery website. The grand prize, $94 million. He spent the rest of his shift in a daze. He answered calls, reset modems, and walked people through network diagnostics. But he wasn't really there. He was floating, untethered from reality, in a state of profound and terrifying shock. When he drove home that afternoon, he obeyed every traffic law with a surgical precision, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. He felt as if he were transporting something more precious than gold. He was carrying the future. He found his father exactly where he'd left him, in the armchair, bathed in the gray light of the late afternoon. The television was off. Michael was just sitting, staring at the wall, a man adrift in a sea of worry. Ethan didn't know how to start. 1,000 possible openings ran through his mind, all of them feeling too loud, too cheap. He walked over and simply sat on the ottoman in front of his father's chair, the way he used to as a boy when he had a bad dream. "Dad," he began, his voice quiet and unnervingly calm. Michael's eyes slowly shifted to meet his son's. "Ethan, I did something yesterday," Ethan continued. "I shouldn't have, maybe. I don't know. But I did it anyway." A flicker of irritation crossed Michael's face. "If this is about money, son, I don't want to hear it. I've got enough on my mind." "It is about money, and it isn't," Ethan said, taking a steadying breath. "You know how you've always said that those numbers were the story of your life?" Michael just grunted in response. "I went to the 7-Eleven last night, after you came home. I played them." The irritation in Michael's eyes hardened into anger. "What did I tell you? What is wrong with you? We are drowning and you're throwing money away on that garbage, that fantasy?" He started to rise from his chair, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and shame. "Dad, please," Ethan said, his voice firm but gentle. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ticket. He held it out. I couldn't stand seeing you give up. Not after 20 years. It felt wrong. It felt like our family was giving up." Michael stared at the ticket in his son's hand, then looked away, shaking his head in disgust. "Get that out of my face. It's a waste." Ethan didn't move. He simply took out his phone, opened the browser to the lottery page, and placed both the phone and the ticket on the worn wooden side table next to his father's chair. "Please," Ethan whispered. "Just look. For me." Something in his son's voice, a strange, heavy gravity, stopped Michael. He slowly sank back into his chair. He glanced at Ethan, whose eyes were filled with an emotion he couldn't decipher, and then, with the weary reluctance of a man humoring a child, he picked up the ticket and the phone. He looked at the phone screen. He looked at the ticket. He looked back at the phone. The color drained from his face. The anger, the frustration, the years of accumulated disappointment, it all evaporated, replaced by a vast, silent, stunning disbelief. His hand, the one holding the ticket, began to tremble. Sarah, drawn by the sudden shift in the atmosphere, came in from the kitchen wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Michael, what is it?" she asked. He couldn't speak. He just looked at her, his eyes wide. A tear welled up and traced a path through the grime and wrinkles on his cheek. Then another. He let out a choked sob, a sound that came from a place of deep, primordial pain and release. It was the sound of a dam breaking after a lifetime of holding back a flood. He hunched over in his chair, his powerful shoulders shaking as 20 years of quiet desperation poured out of him. Sarah rushed to his side, placing a hand on his back. "Michael, what is it? You're scaring me." He couldn't form the words. He just pointed a trembling finger at the ticket and then at Ethan. Ethan finally spoke, his own voice thick with emotion. "He won, Mom. Dad won." Sarah looked, and her own gasp was swallowed by the charged silence of the room. They stood there for a long moment, a family suspended between a lifetime of struggle and an impossible new reality. Finally, Michael looked up at his son, his face a mess of tears and dawning wonder. "You," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It was your $2. Ethan shook his head, a tear finally escaping his own eye. "No, Dad. It was your 20 years. It was always your dream. I just carried it for you for a day." In that moment, the money was an abstract concept. The numbers on the screen were meaningless. All that mattered was the look that passed between father and son. It was a look of gratitude, of awe, of a love so profound it had managed to bend the laws of probability. Michael reached out and pulled Ethan into a fierce embrace, burying his face in his son's shoulder, holding onto him as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had just been turned upside down. The house on Elm Street was no longer a symbol of debt and struggle. It was a testament to the enduring, improbable, and unshakable power of a family's hope. True luck isn't found in a winning ticket, but in the faith we place in one another. The story of Michael and Ethan teaches us that sometimes the greatest prize isn't the money, but the ability to pass hope forward. When we give up on our own dreams, they can find new life in the hands of those who love us, showing that the most valuable legacy is one of perseverance and unconditional love. If this story moved you, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more tales of hope and transformation. Thank you for watching.